Hello again, guys. So I just came back from my very first official Japanese tea ceremony lesson, but today was a little bit special in that there were basically two parts of my experience today. The first part, it was actually not just me, but it was two other guests. So one guest was a woman who lives in Japan and has been studying Japanese tea ceremony for over 35 years. So obviously she's quite an expert on the topic, and her daughter-in-law was also there, and she has recently started to study Japanese tea ceremony, and it was interesting to hear her talk about her struggles trying to achieve the sort of specificity of Japanese tea ceremony. Essentially what happened was the three of us acted as the guests and my teacher acted as the host and served us tea. And the tea that we had today was a special kind of tea. It wasn't the uscha that I had last week, but it was koicha. Uscha, like I talked about last week, is a tea that's a little bit more diluted with water, whereas koicha, which literally means dark tea, is more of a thicker, heavier substance where it kind of just tastes like a bunch of matcha powder and like a little bit of moisture. It's very just thick and almost like toothpaste. And after drinking it, it was so strong that our teeth and our mouth were actually stained green for a little bit. It's that thick of a tea, but it was actually very good. I originally thought it was going to be a little bit on the bitter side, but it was not bitter at all. I would just say it was very strong sense of matcha, which is green tea, the powder of the green tea, by the way. It was just very strong, but I was generally able to drink it, so hopefully I did okay. It's really interesting to hear from someone who had been studying Japanese tea ceremony for so long and hear her talk really passionately about the idea and the concept behind it. And something she really focused on was the fact that while tea ceremony is very specific and how it looks is very important, that's not really the essential thought behind it. Putting your heart and soul into what you're doing is what makes it clean, is what makes it beautiful. Another thing that I found interesting about my experience today was the three of us would line up as guests, and then the host would be here, and the very first guest, who was the woman who had been studying Japanese tea ceremony for a long time, sat to my right, and she actually is the first guest is the person who really initiates any sort of conversation and interaction that happens between guest and host. So she would be the one who sort of, bows and then asks the host a question and the host replies. That's basically the only sort of communication going on in the room. Otherwise, it's quite silent. I found really interesting the sort of questions that she would ask. She would ask like, okay, can I see this tool and this tool? And she would be looking at it and then be like, so where is this from? What kind of material is this? And the host would reply. That shows how much studying goes into this process, is because you not only have to know how to do it and what tools are what, but you also have to know where your tools come from and what they're made out of. Another question that she asked was to haiken, or basically observe, I guess, the kishiki of the tea bowl. So kishiki is actually the view, so she really wants to observe the view of the tea bowl, and I was kind of like, okay, what does that mean? With koicha, obviously very thick stuff, after you drink it, it sort of leaves, marks inside the bowl, not in the sense that like after you clean it there's like a stain, not like that, but after you drink it and you just leave it there, there's basically that koicha stuff has been swished around all over the bowl and made a sort of pattern in the bowl, and it's a very beautiful dark green, and then the bowl itself is black, so it's very apparent. And seeing this view of how the tea was basically swirled around in the bowl is the kishiki, the view, and looking at it is almost like looking at art and seeing how beautiful it is. I was really honored to be able to interact and communicate with a person who had been studying Japanese tea ceremony for so long, but after about an hour and a half they had to leave, and I started my own personal Japanese tea ceremony lesson. And I basically learned the basics of how to sort of fold certain cloths that are used. Cloths used to clean are a huge part of the tea ceremony. There's basically, like, think of this as the cup and then think of this as the towel. And it's basically a very gentle, barely even touching the top and just kind of sliding it over and sliding it off. And obviously that's not going to do a lot of cleaning physically. It's not going to remove any bacteria or any residue. It's not about the cleaning, but it's about the purifying. It's very, you know, the idea, the spiritual idea of purifying and cleaning and showing the guest that you have cleaned and purified the bowl with maybe even your thoughts. But this is just sort of like a physical gesture to sort of indicate your thoughts. It's very Japanese. Please check out my more detailed account of today's experience below. So until next time, bye guys!